Okay, let me bring up our PowerPoint and get started. So today we get to talk about site visits, and I can tell you of all my years working at the authority, site visits were always my favorite part of the job. Let me tell you why. Well, let's start with our usual slides. So we are recording, as you just heard. So we're going to keep you muted, but use the chat box in the lower right-hand corner to pose questions, and we'll stop periodically, and Megan will help me. Will tee up those questions for me, and we'll answer them for you. Everyone will receive an email after this, hopefully this afternoon, from the CJA R3 training at illinois.gov email address with the recording that we're doing right now, as well as PDF of the PowerPoint. And the email will kind of capture any key information from today's training. If you have other staff at your agency that you'd like to be included on the invitations and to receive those follow-up emails, please use the CJA.R3 training email address to send me their name, their role on the grant, and their email address. So we have 4 things to talk about today. We're going to talk about the purpose of our site visits. We're going to talk about preparation for site visits. We're going to talk about what we do on our site visits and then what happens afterward. So these are the 3 big purposes of authority site visits: to give us a better understanding of the program, to dig into grant compliance, and to talk about technical assistance and next steps. Let's talk about each one. The reason that site visits were always my favorite part of the job was because it's an opportunity to get beyond just like the paperwork and the reports that you turn in, to really build our relationship, you know, to be able to spend time with our grantees live and in person, and to see where they work, and to see the people that are doing the work. I really get an opportunity to learn about your successes and the challenges that you face in implementing the program and your strategies for addressing those challenges. As I say, it gives me that opportunity to go beyond the paperwork, to really sort of viscerally understand the problem that you're trying to address through the program, and how the program operates. I have a younger specialist that I was training, and he kind of laughed at me when he would ride along on site visits. He said, because he was always waiting for my favorite question when I was meeting the staff that are doing the work, I always ask, what brings people to this work? Because we know that this is not always the most glamorous or high paid, or, you know, and sometimes is kind of dangerous work that you may be doing in your community. I really appreciate understanding why people do this kind of work. And it gives me an opportunity to understand their connection to the work, and you know, what really drives them to do it. But it also gives me an opportunity to understand the context in which the program operates. One of my favorite stories is that I had a probation program that I was visiting, and we had tried to, you know, like expand their program because all the data that we were seeing saying their caseloads were still too high. And we wanted to give them more money to add more probation officers to do really meaningful supervision of these. Actually, it was a sex offender program. But they kept saying no to money, and I didn't understand until I went and did the visit, and I found that they literally did not have space for one more person in their office. And like they had, you know, taken a supply closet and turned that into an office. And sometimes just something that simple can really, you know, give us a better understanding of the environment that you're operating your program in, and how you're actually able to make the program happen. So that's what I gained from site visits. But of course, there's always a compliance piece as well. So the specialist who makes the site visit with you will be reviewing your fiscal procedures. We want to make sure that you have adequate controls in place when you're when you're making your expenses and how you're constructing your fiscal report, your PFR that you're submitting to us. We want to make sure that your backup documentation is in good shape, that you've got adequate documentation for all of these expenses and for the PFRs that you're submitting to us. And we're also going to look at the programmatic reporting processes. So we want to see how you're developing the PPR information, the periodic performance reports that you'll be submitting. We want to understand that record keeping as well. And of course, we are also concerned about the confidentiality of that information, particularly when you're working with youth. And so we want to make sure that you have good processes in place to protect their confidentiality. One thing I do want to mention when it comes to compliance is that even though we're going to be looking at your financial records and these processes, your grant specialists are not auditors. This is not an audit visit, but by kind of reviewing those guidelines and the standards for your record keeping, we hope to help you get a good, clean bill of health when you are audited. So site visits are another step to help you prepare for an audit, but they are not an audit visit. The third thing that we hope to achieve in the site visits is providing any technical assistance and kind of reviewing what the next steps are for your grant. So you'll see in a few minutes how we prepare for the site visit, but in that preparation, we're kind of identifying issues that we need to discuss with you. But we also encourage you to, be developing the things you want to talk to us about as well. We are going to review your spending, how you're doing in your allocations. Will be a need for a budget revision. And we're also going to talk about your progress toward meeting those grant objectives. So, at the beginning of the grant, right now, you're, defining those benchmarks for your performance, and you'll be reporting on those benchmarks through your PPR throughout the life of the grant. But when we come out and do the site visit, we want to kind of see where you're at in your progress toward meeting those benchmarks and discuss if those were realistic objectives to define, and what barriers there may be to meeting those benchmarks.
Maureen,
Yes.
can you share your screen?
Oh my goodness, am I not sharing my screen?
No.
Oh heavens, my goodness.
At first, I thought you were just kind of telling us about what we were going to go over, and then you just continued, and I was like, I think we're supposed to be slides.
I can't believe I did that. Hang on one second. I apologize. I thought I was. All right, we're gonna miss those initial slides. I apologize. It's gonna be an interesting recording with no visual. So it makes more sense with the slides. So this is what you missed. But I think I covered everything there. Were there any questions in the chat? Do you want to share your screen, Maureen?
Those are pretty much the only questions.
Thanks, Megan. All right, let's talk about how we prepare for a site visit. So site visits typically last around 2 hours, and you'll see why as we go through what we're going to cover. But I've had, site visits that have lasted all day when there were multiple service locations, and I wanted to meet the staff at each of those locations and understand the service area that they were affecting. But I would say that 2 hours is the minimum time to expect. So in preparation for the site visit, your grant specialist is going to reach out and schedule a time with you. And then they're going to confirm that site visit with a letter, which includes an agenda for the visit. Now, your grant specialist typically requests some documents in advance. And so we call that a desk review. And so what we're going to do is ask you to send us some financial backup documentation and some programmatic backup documentation. And the reason for that is that we want an opportunity to kind of review that information before we come out, so that those 2 hours that we spend with you, we can be, instead of watching us look through paperwork, we'll have already reviewed the information, and that we'll be able to discuss any issues that we see in that backup documentation. So typically what we'll do, if they come out in a couple of months, they'll say, could you send me the backup documentation for your December report? And so we just want you to scan that backup, or if you have something electronically, just send that to your grant specialist so they can review it in advance of the visit. So how you prepare for it is, we'd like to have both your funded staff, the folks that are actually doing the work, the folks whose names are in your budget, as well as executive staff available for the site visit. You don't all have to sit in the same room together. We can do it in stages, certainly. But we're going to be, we want you to be able to bring questions to us about grant requirements and about programmatic issues that may have arisen for you. And one of my favorite things is to tour the site or to see the program in action. And again, that really helps to deepen our understanding of the program and the work that you're doing in the community. So I think we'll just jump right into the agenda. So as I said, we want to meet with the program staff, the folks that are doing the work. We want to discuss those successes that you've had, as well as the speed bumps that you're going to encounter, and how you're navigating around those speed bumps that you meet, and then provide any technical assistance that you may need on those program requirements, on all the paperwork. We want to meet with the administrative staff, and that's where we're really going to be discussing what we saw when we reviewed those documents in advance. So if there's any issues or questions about the paperwork that you have, that's where we're going to talk about it. And if there are any specific conditions that are included in your grant agreement, that's when we're going to be sort of evaluating your progress toward meeting those specific conditions. Remember, the specific conditions are the ones that are indicated by the internal control questionnaire, the ICQ, that you do in the GATA portal, or that may be identified through that programmatic risk assessment that your grant staff are doing at the beginning of your program. And they turn into these very specific items that are added to your grant agreement. And they'll say, like, you must have, X policy in place by, X number of months into the grant. You may, have to establish procedures for, 2 signatures on every, 2 authorizing signatures on every dispersal, those kinds of processes and policies. And the idea of including them in your grant is to strengthen your fiscal and administrative capacity as an agency. And so as we move through your grant year, your grant specialist, and especially at the site visit, will be checking in with you on how you are meeting those specific conditions in your grant agreement. As I said, we're going to also be reviewing your spending to date and see if there's a need for any budget revision or amendment to your agreement. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about budget revision and amendment processes and how they're very different things for us. We're also going to be reviewing your financial record keeping. And if you have subcontracts or subawards included in your agreement, we're also going to be reviewing them, especially with subawards. We talked about subawards in general yesterday, but on next Wednesday's training, we're going to dig into monitoring of the subawards. That's a responsibility that grantees are taking on when they have partner agencies as part of their grant agreement. So at the site visit, we'll also look at the subcontracts and subawards. We're also going to dig into your performance to date too, and talk about how you're meeting, how well you're doing meeting those performance metrics. We're going to look at your programmatic record keeping and any changes that need to be made to the program. I do want to caution you, though, is that either through budget revisions or amendments or even the programmatic changes here when we're talking about how well you're doing in meeting your benchmarks, we can't allow you to have any revisions to your program that are outside the initial scope of your program. Because remember, obviously, you know that this was a very competitive process. We received almost 600 applications and had money for 88 grants. So it was a very competitive process. And so we can't like really do a big right turn with your program or add some new component or subtract some critical component because you were judged on the scope of the agreement that in your application. So while we can make some tweaks, we really can't allow you to really change the scope of your program substantially. So that's something that we can discuss at the site visit. In the rare instance that you may need a corrective action, if there is something that is either administratively or programmatically that is in need of a formal process for corrective action, we're going to review your progress toward the corrective action plan that you receive. And we're also going to discuss any next steps for your program. As I said, if you have a subaward in your program, one of your objectives will be oversight of those partner agencies. So during your site visit, we will be discussing your oversight of your partners, and that will be a component of this site visit. But one thing I'll give you a little heads up is that if you do have subawards in your agreement, you'll be conducting site visits with your partner agencies. So there'll be a whole other piece of your site visit to discuss your oversight of those partner agencies. As I said, the corrective actions are those detailed instructions, and those are for, serious deficiencies that we've been alerted to in your program performance or the program administration. And these are just some of the most common examples we see of those kinds of serious deficiencies. And at the site visit, we will be checking in on your progress toward, satisfying that corrective action plan. I think I saw some questions pop up in the chat, Megan.
Yep. The first question is, will the grant specialist let us know what the background information is?
The background information. I'm not sure what that means. Their site visit will have a detailed agenda, and then they'll be requesting specific information. If you mean background information, like the backup documentation, yeah, they'll tell you, please send me, copies of all of the receipts and financial records that back up your PFR for January, for instance, and how you and the backup documentation for the PPR. So we'd want to see the client log for the event that you reported as being conducted during that period. So that's the kind of, they'll be very specific on the things that they're looking for when they request that backup documentation. So I hope that answered your question.
The next question is, if location is accommodating in size, but is not an office setting, will that be acceptable?
I'm sorry, so their location is not an office setting? Sure, that's okay, especially if, like you've got some recreational program, we'll meet you there, wherever you do the work and find a place to meet. Go to a coffee shop and meet, but there's got to be some place that you're keeping your records. So that typically will be the place that we meet because we want to have an opportunity to review those records. So I don't believe I've ever done a site that had a program that didn't actually have some sort of office someplace. So we'll find a place to meet. You'll work that out with your grant specialist, but if we could actually see the program in action, that's, you know, that's a real bonus for us.
And that's it on questions.
Okey doke. So let's talk about what happens after the site visit. So you're going to get a letter after your site visit from your grant specialist that is going to summarize the visit. It's going to identify specifically any issues that need to be resolved that were raised during that site visit. They'll discuss any corrective action that's needed and specify the due dates for any corrective action steps and talk about what's next for your program. I want to emphasize too that the site visit is not, you know, you're busy negotiating your agreement now with your grant specialist. You have a lot of contact with them. We're going to be doing site visits within the next several months, but those aren't your only opportunities to really keep your grant specialist, you know, sort of in the know what's going on with your program. So communication is key with your specialist, and we want that communication to be ongoing. So as you run into other speed bumps in your program, or if there are staff changes, or if you just have questions about some of the requirements or guidelines, we really encourage you to have that robust, ongoing communication and relationship with your grant specialist, because the better you build that relationship, the better they're able to help you keep within all of those guidelines and to really understand what's going on with your program and provide you the assistance that you need. So here's the link to today's training, the training survey rather. As I said, next Wednesday, we're going to be covering the monitoring of subawards. And then next Thursday, we'll do budget revisions and amendments. Do we have any questions, Meg?
Questions?
Megan, any questions?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, then I'm going to thank you all for your time. Apologize once again for not sharing my screen when I thought that I was. And we'll be hopefully getting you the follow-up email this afternoon. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.